All right, so welcome to the deep dive, everybody. Today, we're going to be looking at something that I think a lot of you guys have probably thought about before, and that is thinking directly in English.
Yeah,
And, as English learners, we spend so much time, uh, you know, trying to translate in our heads from our native language to English.
right.
And
Yeah.
it can really slow us down. And so the purpose of this deep dive is to explore ways that you can cut out that middleman and actually start thinking directly in English.
Exactly. And it really can have a huge impact on your English.
Yeah.
It seems like a subtle shift.
Right.
But when you can actually make that happen, it really does make a big difference. I think one of the core issues is just the awkwardness of translation,
Yeah.
right? Like if you were to think about a phrase like, I am cold,
Yeah.
in some languages, you'd actually translate that word for word and say, I have cold,
Right.
which sounds totally unnatural in English.
Yeah.
And so it just highlights the importance of, actually being able to think in English.
Yeah. So what are some of the benefits of thinking in English?
Yeah,
Well, I think the most obvious one is that you can speak more quickly and fluently.
right.
When you're not having to translate everything,
Mm.
your words are going to come out much more naturally and much more readily.
And that speed really leads to confidence, too.
Absolutely.
Because when you can access the words and phrases more quickly, you feel more comfortable expressing yourself.
Right.
And, there's less hesitation, fewer awkward silences.
Sure.
And you just overall have a greater feeling of capability in the language.
Yeah, and it's not just speaking either. When you start thinking in English, your listening comprehension also improves
Right.
because your brain is already operating in English.
Yeah.
And so you're able to process what you're hearing much more easily so you can follow conversations, understand movies, and even like music in English without having to translate everything in your head.
Yeah, and I think that what's really fascinating about this is it even connects to your pronunciation. Well, because when you're thinking in English, you're essentially doing a mental rehearsal of the sounds.
Right.
Right, so you're starting to internalize the rhythm and the intonation,
I see.
which helps you to articulate words more clearly.
Okay. So let's kind of take a step back here and look at, why is this move to thinking in English so important for overall language learning?
Well, if you think about it, when you're relying on translation,
Right.
it's creating a bottleneck. It's introducing this delay that prevents you from being truly fluent.
Sure.
It's like trying to communicate through a bad firm connection.
Right.
There's always this lag. And so thinking directly in English removes that barrier and allows your speech to flow smoothly.
Absolutely. And I think the confidence boost is huge too.
Yeah.
It's not just about speed. It's about feeling more comfortable putting yourself out there,
Right.
participating in conversations and
Yeah.
not being held back by, the worry of, oh, am I going to find the right words? Quickly enough. So let's think about why this is such a challenging thing to do.
Yeah.
For English learners, what are some of the common mistakes that people make that prevent them from thinking in English?
I think one of the most common ones, and we've kind of already touched on this, is the over-reliance on translation.
Okay.
Right? So if you're constantly trying to find that equivalent in your native language
Sure.
before you speak or even think you're not giving your brain the opportunity to operate in English,
Okay.
it's like trying to ride a bike with training wheels even after you've learned to balance.
Yeah.
Right? You need to take those training wheels off at some point.
So what would be another kind of common obstacle that people encounter?
Yeah, I think another really big one is focusing too much on grammar.
Okay.
A lot of learners get stuck trying to construct these grammatically flawless sentences in their minds before they even attempt to speak or to think. And so this overthinking creates a block that really slows down natural thought and speech.
So it's almost like they're pursuing perfection,
Right.
but it's actually getting in the way.
Exactly. And, even native speakers don't, consciously analyze every single grammar rule before they speak.
Right.
So it's important to remember that language is dynamic, it's intuitive, and while grammar is important for accuracy over time,
Sure.
being overly focused on it
Yeah.
in this, initial stage of trying to think in English can really stifle fluency and natural expression.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's important to remember, too, that even native speakers, we make grammatical errors all the time.
Oh, yeah.
It's just a natural part of communication.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so what about the emotional aspect of it? I mean, does fear of making mistakes also play a part in this?
Oh, absolutely. I think the fear of making mistakes is huge.
Yeah.
If learners are constantly worried about saying something wrong, they hesitate to even try.
Right.
And that fear can create this mental block that prevents them from actually practicing and developing the ability to think directly in the language.
Yeah. It's almost like you need to practice to get better, but the fear of not being perfect is preventing you from practicing.
Exactly. It's this kind of catch-22.
Right.
And so it's really important to reframe mistakes, not as failures, but as a natural and essential part of the learning process.
Yeah.
Each mistake is an opportunity to learn and refine your understanding. And, true fluency comes from consistent practice, which includes making mistakes and learning from them.
And so what about a learner's, everyday environment? Does that play a role in their ability to start thinking in English?
I think it plays a huge role. The amount of immersion that you have in English in your daily life really matters.
Okay.
Because if your day-to-day interactions, the media you consume, even your own internal thoughts are primarily in your native language, then your brain is going to naturally default to that language.
Yeah, makes sense.
It's a matter of habit and exposure. So if your contact with English is limited to the classroom or specific study sessions, your brain's not really getting the input it needs to automatically switch over to thinking in English.
So it sounds like creating that immersive environment is really key, even if you don't live in an English-speaking country.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now that we understand why thinking in English is so important
Yeah.
and what some of those common pitfalls are,
Right.
let's get into some practical advice.
Yeah.
What are some concrete steps that our listeners can take to start thinking more in English?
Well, I think a great place to start is with something really simple, and that is naming things around you in English.
Okay.
This helps to establish a direct link between the objects and their English names,
Right.
and it bypasses the need for translation.
So, if you're sitting at your desk right now,
Yeah.
think desk, think computer, think mouse, think keyboard.
Right, exactly. And you can take it even further by describing your actuals in English. So instead of just thinking coffee, think I am drinking coffee from my cup.
Okay, so that would be the first strategy.
Yeah.
What would be strategy number 2?
Okay, number 2, start having internal conversations with yourself in English.
Talk to yourself.
Exactly. I know it sounds a little strange,
Sure.
but it's a really effective way to practice without any pressure.
Okay.
You can literally do this anywhere,
Right.
in the shower, while you're cooking, while you're walking down the street, just describe what you're doing or what you're thinking.
So like, I am putting on my shirt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is blue.
Yeah. And it's just, a private space for you to experiment with the language without worrying about making mistakes or being judged.
Okay, makes sense. Strategy number 3.
All right, number 3, use an English-to-English dictionary.
Okay.
This can be a real game changer because when you come across a word that you don't know, instead of immediately looking for the translation in your native language,
Right.
look up the definition in English.
So what you're doing is you're strengthening those neural connections within the English language network in your brain,
Okay.
rather than relying on that separate native language network.
Could you give me an example of that?
Yeah, so let's say you come across the word excited and you're not really sure what it means. You look it up in an English-to-English dictionary, and you might find a definition that says feeling very happy and eager.
Right.
So now you're connecting this new word excited with these other English words.
Okay.
Happy, eager. And so you're building these connections within English itself rather than going back to your native language.
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Okay, so that was number 3. Number 4.
Number 4, start by thinking in simple sentences.
Okay.
A lot of learners feel overwhelmed when they try to, construct these really complex sentences in their heads right away.
Sure.
And it's actually much more effective to begin with short, basic thoughts.
So instead of thinking, oh, I really need to go to the grocery store later because I need to get some food to make dinner,
Yeah.
you would think something like, I need vegetables.
Exactly. Start with, I need vegetables.
Okay.
I am hungry. And then as you get more comfortable with those simple structures, you can gradually build up to more complex thoughts.
Okay, I like that. Okay, number 5.
All right, number 5, cultivate an English inner voice.
Okay.
So this means that you're consciously trying to have your internal monologue, that constant stream of thoughts in English,
Right.
rather than your native language.
Okay, so like if I'm thinking about, what am I going to do today?
Right.
Instead of thinking about that in my native language, I could think, what should I do first? Maybe I'll start with breakfast.
Exactly. You're actively engaging your internal thought processes in English.
Got it. So it's like having an inner monologue, but it's in English.
Yes, exactly.
And number 6.
Number 6, immerse yourself in English.
Okay.
I know this one might seem obvious,
Sure.
but it's really crucial. The more that you surround yourself with the language through podcasts, videos, movies, music, books,
Right.
the more your brain is going to start thinking in English naturally.
Yeah, it's all about input, right?
It
The
is.
more you're exposed to the language, the more you're going to start thinking in it.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about these strategies for thinking in English.
Yeah.
How can our listeners turn these strategies into habits?
Yeah, it's a great question.
What are some daily exercises that they could do?
Well, one really effective exercise is to begin and end your day with English thoughts.
Okay.
So the moment you wake up, try to mentally outline your plans for the day in English. Today's Tuesday. I have a meeting at 9 a.m. I need to finish writing that report. And then at the end of the day, before you go to sleep, take a few minutes to review what happened during the day. Again, all in English.
Mm-hmm.
This morning I went for a walk. I had a great conversation with a colleague. I really enjoyed dinner.
So you're kind of like priming your brain
Exactly.
for thinking in English.
Yeah, you're priming it at the start of the day,
Right.
and then you're reinforcing it at the end of the day.
And making it more of a habit. Okay, so that would be one daily exercise. What would be another one?
Another one is to establish a no translation rule for a set period of time each day, even if it's just for 30 minutes.
Okay.
During that time, you consciously try to only think in English no matter what.
No matter what.
No matter what. And this might feel really challenging at first, but even when you notice yourself slipping back into your native language, just the act of catching yourself and trying again provides really valuable practice.
So it's okay to make mistakes.
Absolutely. It's all part of the process.
What about, incorporating some verbal practice into our routines?
Yeah, definitely another great exercise is to talk to yourself in English out loud.
Out loud.
Out loud for a few minutes each day. Like we were saying before, describe what you're doing, what you're seeing, what you're thinking. I am washing the dishes. The water is warm. I wonder what I should make for lunch tomorrow. And this, might feel a little silly at first, but making those thoughts audible can really help to strengthen the connection between your thoughts and the English words.
Right. And it's almost like you're having a rehearsal
It is.
for a real conversation.
Exactly.
But, in a low pressure environment.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was exercise number 3. What about number 4?
Number 4 is to use English during routine activities.
Okay.
So if you're cooking, narrate the steps in English. If you're driving, describe the traffic and the scenery around you. If you're exercising, comment on how you're feeling.
So it's about making English the default language of your mind, no matter what you're doing.
Exactly.
Okay, so for example, if I'm taking a walk,
Yeah.
I might be thinking, oh, the weather's so nice today. The sky's so blue. I feel really relaxed.
Right, exactly.
Okay, and number 5.
Number 5, keep a simple English journal.
Okay.
So this is a great way to just write down your thoughts, daily events, or even your goals in English. And at this point, don't worry too much about perfect grammar. The main focus is on expressing yourself in the language.
And it's a good way to kind of track your progress, too.
It is.
Okay, so let's talk about, the challenges, because it's not always going to be easy to make this shift.
Right.
What are some of the common challenges that learners might encounter when they're trying to think in English, and how can they overcome those?
Well, I think, as we've discussed, the biggest challenge is just that deeply ingrained habit of thinking in our native language first.
Right.
Right? That's what we're used to. And so the key here is to be patient with yourself and be persistent. Start small with those simple English thoughts, individual words or short phrases, and, use that English to English dictionary
Right.
to really build those connections within the language itself.
So you're kind of slowly trying to wean yourself off of
Yeah.
your native language.
Yeah, exactly.
What if you get stuck and you don't know the word for something?
Yeah, that's another common source of frustration for learners. But instead of getting discouraged, try to describe the word using simple English. So if you can't remember the word refrigerator, you can think a cold box where I keep food.
Right.
And this keeps your thought process in English. And it often helps you to either remember the actual word or come up with a suitable alternative.
That's a great technique. I like that one.
Yeah.
What about motivation? Sometimes it can be hard to stay motivated if you feel like you're not making any progress.
Yeah, motivation is definitely key. And I think a helpful strategy here is to actively track your progress. So, we talked about keeping an English journal. You could also try making short voice recordings of yourself speaking in English or even just thinking in English. And then after a few weeks or a few months, listen back to them. And I think you'll probably be surprised at how much you've improved without even realizing it.
And that can really boost your motivation.
Such a good point. It's like you can listen passively or you can really make it count.
Exactly. And I love the example from one of the articles about cooking.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine you're following along with an English recipe. As you're doing each step, You're kind of narrating it in your head in English. Like, okay, I'm chopping the onions now.
I need 2 eggs.
Yes,
I know.
exactly. So you're not adding study time.
Right.
You're just making those everyday moments an opportunity to think in English.
And I think that's really what makes it feel less like a chore. If it's already part of something you enjoy, you're way more likely to stick with it.
You know, I was thinking about this from like a habit formation perspective.
Mhm.
When you link a new habit to something you already do regularly or something you really enjoy, you're tapping into existing neural pathways in your brain.
Oh.
It makes the whole process so much smoother because it's not this separate thing anymore.
It's just blended in.
It's just part of your life.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's so much less intimidating, I think, than feeling like, ugh, okay, now I've set aside time to think in English.
Right. And that actually brings us to another really good point that the sources brought up, the importance of setting micro goals.
Yes. This was huge.
The idea that instead of saying, I'm going to think in English all day, which honestly, who can do that?
Right. You just set yourself up for failure almost.
Exactly. So instead, you break it down into tiny, manageable chunks. Like one article suggested, okay, after I finish breakfast, I'm going to spend 5 minutes thinking in English.
That feels so much more doable.
Right. Or while I'm making my coffee, I'll talk to myself in English about what I'm doing.
Like the water's boiling. I
Yeah.
need to get a mug.
Yeah. And each of those little wins, it's like it builds momentum.
And does. It's encouraging.
And suddenly, thinking in English consistently doesn't seem like this massive, impossible mountain to climb.
It feels like a bunch of little hills.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That you can totally handle.
I like that analogy. Okay, so we've got connecting it with things we love and breaking it down into smaller goals. But what about those times when, you're putting in the effort, but you just don't feel like you're making any progress?
That's the worst feeling.
It is. And that's where this idea of tracking your wins came in, which I
Yeah.
thought was so smart.
That was one of my favorite takeaways.
Me too. Because you might not always see the progress right away. But if you're actually tracking what you're doing, it becomes a lot more concrete.
Absolutely. It's not just this vague sense of, oh, I practiced today.
Yeah.
You're actually keeping a record. One article suggested writing down things, like what songs did you listen to, and really focus on the lyrics.
I like that.
Some even suggested recording yourself speaking in English, even if it's just for like a minute or two.
Or doing a mini video diary.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like even just 30 seconds a day. Doesn't have to be this big production.
Right. And then the key, from what I understood, is to go back and review it. Like after a week, listen back to those recordings or read your notes.
Yes, because then you can really see and hear those subtle improvements.
It's like proof that you're actually making progress, even if it doesn't always feel like it.
I think that's so motivating. It's like you're turning this abstract goal into something tangible.
I love that. It's like your own little language learning report card.
So we've got connecting with enjoyable activities, setting micro goals, and tracking our progress. And you know what? The sources we looked at actually had a little challenge for everyone listening.
Oh, yeah. It's a fun one.
It is. It's called My Day in English.
And it's all about putting these ideas into practice right now.
In real time.
So what we want you to do is just take a minute and think about your day so far
From the moment you woke up.
until right this second. And try to come up with, 3 to 5 sentences about your day
In English.
in English. And you can say them out loud or just think them in your head, whatever's comfortable. And if you need some ideas to get started, some of the examples from the articles were like, I woke up at 7 a.m. I had coffee and toast for breakfast.
You could even say something like, I'm listening to this deep dive while I'm walking my dog.
Or driving to work.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be complicated. Just a few simple sentences to get those English thoughts flowing.
It's like a little mini workout for your brain.
Exactly.
So we've talked about a lot of really cool stuff, but one thing that I think is so important to remember, and this was emphasized a lot in what we read, is that this is a journey. It's not like you're going to wake up tomorrow and suddenly be thinking in English 24/7.
It's so true. It's a process.
It is. It's about gradually rewiring your brain to make English your default mode.
And it's about those small, consistent efforts that you make over time.
Absolutely. It's not about being perfect. It's about showing up and putting in a little bit of work each day.
Even if it's just for a few minutes, those little moments add up.
And that consistency is really what makes the difference.
Totally. And that's exactly what we want to avoid. So instead, we're going to look at a really simple framework for structuring your responses.
Okay.
So think of it this way. Instead of diving headfirst into this massive detailed response, you can ease into the conversation by starting with a feeling.
Exactly.
Just something simple like, it was nice, or it was pretty relaxing. This gets those vocal cords working, and it's a low-pressure way to enter the conversation.
It's like dipping your toes in the water before you jump in.
Exactly. Then the second part is to mention just one specific thing that you did.
Uh-huh.
So building on that, it was nice you could add, I went to the park.
Yep.
One clear action.
Keep it simple.
Yes. And finally, the third element is to include one little detail about that action.
Right.
So to complete our example, you could say the weather was sunny.
Perfect.
So putting it all together was nice. I went to the park, the weather was sunny.
See,
Super straightforward.
easy peasy.
But it gets the job done and it sounds natural.
It does. And the great thing is it's like a foundation you can build on.
That's right.
So you start with this basic three-part answer. You get comfortable with it.
Uh-huh.
And then as you gain confidence, you can start layering in more details.
Yeah.
So instead of just, I went to the park, you might say, I went to the park with my sister. We had ice cream and talked for hours.
Exactly. It's like you have this scaffolding to support you as you expand your responses without feeling overwhelmed.
I love that scaffolding.
Yeah. It's a good visual, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So now let's see how this actually plays out in a real conversation.
Okay.
We have this little snippet of a conversation between two people, John and Sarah. And what's interesting is how natural and effortless it sounds.
Right.
Sarah starts by asking, hey, John, how was your weekend? And John replies, pretty relaxing. I stayed home, read a bit, and watched a movie.
Yeah. And he keeps it nice and concise.
Exactly.
He covers the feeling, the activity, and even implies a detail about just chilling.
Uh-huh. And most importantly, he throws the question back to Sarah.
Oh, yeah. That's crucial. Keeps the conversation flowing.
Keep it going. Exactly. And Sarah responds, sounds chill. I went out with some friends. We had dinner at this new restaurant.
Perfect.
Again, clear and to the point, mentioning a specific activity.
Yep.
Then John asks, how cool, was it good? And Sarah wraps it up with, so good. I had the best pasta of my life.
So you see how that back and forth is so smooth. It's not about these long, complicated sentences.
Right.
It's more about a natural exchange of simple, informative answers with those key follow-up questions sprinkled in.
Yeah, and this brings us to a really cool practical element highlighted in our source material today, a section called Now It's Your Turn.
Oh, I love that.
Now, obviously, you can't actually answer us right now.
Right.
But the idea is to immediately put what we're discussing into practice, even just mentally.
Exactly.
The source gives some great example questions. How was your weekend? What did you do? Did you go out or stay home?
Yeah, so even if you're just thinking through the answers in your head or maybe even jotting them down, you're actively engaging with that response structure we've been talking about.
And that's what helps bridge the gap between understanding the concept and actually being able to use it in real time.
Absolutely, it makes it real.
Exactly. So we've tackled structuring responses now. Let's look at some super helpful phrases that can really boost your ability to think more naturally in English. And these phrases can also buy you a little time to formulate your thoughts without automatically jumping into translation mode.
Yeah.
These are like little mental springboards, phrases like, I think, to be honest, it depends. Actually, I'm not sure, but that's a good question.
All those little phrases we use all the time without even thinking about it.
Yeah, exactly. They might seem simple,
Uh-huh.
but they're incredibly effective in conversations. For instance, let's say someone asks you something you haven't really thought about before.
Right.
Starting with, that's a good question, gives you a moment to gather your thoughts in English instead of panicking and trying to translate on the spot.
It takes the pressure off.
It does. And phrases like, to be honest, can add a touch of authenticity to your response. And again, it gives you a natural way to start your sentence without rushing.
Uh-huh.
There's a great example in the material. Sarah asks, what do you think about learning English online? And John replies, to be honest, I think it's really effective, especially if you practice daily.
Perfect.
See how that works? The to be honest isn't just filler. It's a natural lead-in to his opinion, giving him that pause before expressing his thoughts.
Smooth.
And the source even suggests another question for you to practice with. What do you think about English podcasts?
Oh, that's a good one.
It shows how versatile these little starters can be in all sorts of conversations.
Absolutely. Now, as learners progress, they often hit this point where they understand the basics, but keeping a conversation flowing smoothly becomes the challenge.
Yes, the dreaded one-word answer syndrome.
Oh, yeah. So classic, right?
Yeah.
Someone might ask, do you enjoy coffee? And the response is just, yes.
Yeah, end of story.
Conversation killer.
And it's a missed opportunity to build that natural fluency.
Right.
But there's a simple trick here. Just add one extra detail to your answer.
One little detail can make all the difference.
It really can.
Yeah.
So instead of just, yes, try something. Like, yes, I really enjoy it because it helps me feel more awake and focused in the morning, or yes, but I only really like it with a little milk and sugar.
I like that example.
It's a small tweak, but it makes the conversation so much more engaging for both you and the other person.
It shows you're invested.
Yeah. The source gives an example of turning a yes to "do you enjoy reading" into "yes." I love it because it helps me relax before bed.
Nice.
It adds a personal touch, and it naturally invites the other person to ask more questions.
It's like you're tossing the ball back to them.
Exactly. And these little additions, they show that you're actively participating and interested in the conversation.
And that's what turns it into a dynamic back and forth instead of just a question and answer session.
That's it. And it's important to remember small details equal greater fluency.
Absolutely. Now, as you're working on all these strategies, it's crucial to remember you're probably much better at English than you think.
It's so true. We tend to be our own worst critics.
Yeah, and we get caught up in this idea of fluency being about sounding exactly like a native speaker,
Yeah, trying to achieve this perfect accent and everything.
which is not realistic or necessary.
No, it's not. It's more about being able to express your thoughts and ideas clearly and confidently. And the fact that you're listening to this deep dive and actively trying to improve means you're already on the right track.
You're way ahead of the game.
It's about shifting your focus from chasing perfection to celebrating the progress you've already made.
That's a great mindset shift.
It is. And the source actually touches on this by mentioning that its next topic is confidence-building techniques.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we won't go into detail today, but it's a good reminder that even advanced speakers can still feel nervous or self-conscious sometimes.
We all do. It's part of the process.
It is. So
Yeah.
the takeaway here is just keep practicing, keep looking for opportunities to speak, even if they're small.
Yeah.
Whether it's talking to yourself or finding a language partner or just using English in everyday situations.
And remember, making mistakes is not a failure.
It's inevitable.
It's part of learning any language. Don't let the fear of messing up stop you from speaking altogether.
So to sum up our deep dive today, we've focused on giving you practical, actionable strategies to think and respond more naturally in English conversations without relying on translation.
Right.
This involves breaking down your initial responses into a simple structure, using those helpful sentence starters to buy you some thinking time, and consciously adding those little details to keep the conversation flowing.
It all works together.
It does. And as a final thought for you to consider, think about the next time you're in an English conversation.
Okay.
How can you experiment with that feeling? I think a primary hurdle is the fear of making mistakes.
Oh, there's this worry about being judged or not sounding right, sounding silly even. And the sources really emphasize this fear of sounding silly.
Oh, I know that feeling. You're trying to formulate a sentence in your head, and suddenly your inner critic is like, wait a minute, is that the right tense? Are you sure about that pronunciation? And it just completely derails your train of thought.
Right, and it's like this anxiety can just be paralyzing, but the sources all agree that mistakes are not actually roadblocks, they're stepping stones. And the reality is that the people you're talking to are usually focusing on the message you're trying to convey. They're not analyzing every little grammar mistake.
I think that's so important to remember. We get so caught up in our own heads that we forget that language is about connection and communication.
Yeah, and even native speakers make mistakes. It's a natural part of speaking any language.
That's true. I make mistakes all the time.
Exactly.
And I think another thing that can hold us back is comparing our progress to others.
Oh, absolutely.
You see those people who just seem to speak English so effortlessly, and you think, wow, I'll never be that good.
Yeah, and it's easy to feel discouraged when you compare yourself to native speakers or people who are more fluent than you. But it's really important to remember that everyone's language learning journey is different.
Right.
There are so many factors that contribute to fluency. Your exposure to the language, your learning style, even your personality. It's not a competition, and it's not helpful to compare your progress to somebody else's.
Totally. So we've talked about some of the reasons behind this fear of speaking, but now let's get to the good stuff. What are some actionable techniques that our listeners can start using today to build that speaking confidence?
Let's start with something simple but surprisingly effective. Just speak a little louder.
Interesting. What's the reasoning behind that?
Well, when you project your voice more, it can make you sound and feel more confident.
Okay.
It's a mind-body connection, so the source even suggests a little exercise.
Yeah.
Try saying the phrase, I can speak English just at your normal conversational volume.
Okay, I can speak English.
Now say it again, but this time with a little more energy, a little louder.
I can speak English?
Do you notice a difference?
Yeah, actually, I do. It feels more decisive somehow, even though I'm just saying to myself.
Right, that slight increase in volume can actually increase your confidence. It's pretty cool.
Okay, I'm adding that to my list. Speak a little louder. What else?
So the next technique is all about confident body language.
Ooh, I love this one. I've heard so much about the power of body language.
Yeah, it's really important when you're speaking English too, because when you stand tall, make eye contact, even if you're just practicing in front of the mirror, you're sending a message to your brain that says, hey, I'm capable, I can do this.
Right. It's like you're setting yourself up for success.
Exactly. And the
Yeah.
source recommends a specific power pose, hands on your hips, shoulders back, and repeat the affirmation I'm learning, and I'm getting better every day.
I love that. I'm going to try that one.
It really works. You know, there are studies that show that these kinds of expansive postures can lead to actual physiological changes that increase your confidence.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah, so we've got speaking louder, we've got power poses. What's next?
What's next?
Okay, this one might be a little uncomfortable at first, but it's so valuable. Record yourself speaking.
Oh, yeah. I can see how that could be a little intimidating.
It can be, but learners often have a much more negative perception of their speaking than reality.
Hmm. That's probably true.
So the idea is you record yourself for just a minute or two talking about anything you like, your hobbies, your plans for the weekend, whatever, and then you listen back to it.
Okay.
And what this does is it gives you a more objective perspective on your speaking. You can hear how you actually sound and not just the voice in your head that's always criticizing you.
That makes sense, and I bet over time you can actually hear yourself improving.
Exactly, and that's a huge confidence booster.
Awesome.
Okay, ready for another one?
Yes, bring it on.
This one is all about getting comfortable with the act of speaking. Talk to yourself in the mirror.
Okay, now this one might sound a little crazy.
I know it sounds weird, but it really works.
Yeah.
The source recommends just a simple conversation like, how are you? I'm doing well today.
So it's like a practice run for real conversations.
Yeah, exactly. And it can be a little silly, but the more you do it, the less scary it feels to speak English out loud.
I like that.
And you know, you're practicing with the toughest audience yourself.
That's a good point.
All right, next tip. Make an effort to speak even when you don't feel ready.
Oh, this is a big one. I think so many language learners get stuck in this trap of waiting until they feel perfect before they actually speak.
Right, but the truth is you might never feel 100% ready.
That's so true.
And confidence often comes from doing the thing you're afraid of, not waiting until you feel confident to do it.
So just jump in.
Exactly. Start with small interactions like saying hello to a stranger, asking for directions, leaving a comment on a video in English.
These little things can make a big difference.
Yeah, each interaction helps you build that confidence muscle.
Okay, so we've talked about speaking louder, using confident body language, recording ourselves, talking to the mirror, speaking, even when we're not ready. What else can we do to boost our confidence?
Pay attention to your self-talk. That little voice in your head can have a huge impact on your confidence.
Oh yeah, I know that voice all too well. Sometimes it's my biggest cheerleader, and other times it's my worst enemy.
Exactly. So if you're constantly telling yourself, my English is bad or I'll never be fluent, you're going to start believing it.
So we need to reframe those negative thoughts.
Exactly. The source gives some great examples. Instead of saying, my English is bad, say, I'm still learning.
Oh, wow.
Instead of I'm not fluent, say, I'm improving every day.
I love that it's all about focusing on the progress, not the imperfections.
Exactly. And your brain really does listen to you. So be kind to yourself, be patient, and celebrate your successes.
Yes, self-compassion is so important.
Absolutely. And finally, let's talk about affirmations.
Okay, affirmations, those are like positive statements that we repeat to ourselves, right?
Exactly. And the source recommends 3 specific affirmations for building speaking confidence.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first one is, I am confident when I speak English.
I am confident when I speak English.
The second one is, I am not afraid of mistakes.
I am not afraid of mistakes.
And the third one is, I speak English better every day.
I speak English better every day. I like these.
Right. They're simple but powerful, and when you repeat them regularly, they can really help to shift your mindset.
I'm definitely going to try that.
Awesome. So we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about so many different techniques for building speaking confidence, speaking louder, confident body language, recording ourselves, talking to the mirror speaking, even when we don't feel ready, positive self-talk and affirmations. It's like a whole toolkit.
It is. And the key takeaway here is that confidence isn't something you're born with. It's a skill that you develop over time.
Exactly. It's like a muscle that you have to exercise.
And every time you speak English, you're giving that muscle a workout.
Right. And don't forget to celebrate your progress, no matter how small it might seem.
Yes. Be proud of yourself. You're doing great.
You are. And the source material ends by talking about a practical speaking session.
Oh, that sounds like a great next step.
It is. It's all about taking action and putting these techniques into practice.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's a question for you, our listener. How can you incorporate just one or two of these techniques into your daily routine starting today?
And what small speaking goal can you set for yourself this week to really put these ideas into action?
You've got this. We're cheering you on.
We are.
And that's it for our deep dive today.
Until next time.
Bye.